Now, the group of 7 countries, along with Australia and the European Union, agreed on a $60 per barrel price cap on Russian crude oil. With this, they aim to deny Russia of war resources. Now, this raises a slew of questions that we intend to explore. First, what is this price cap? How is it going to work? Second, will Moscow accept EU's price cap? What if Russia decides to take its crude off market altogether? Also, can the oil price cap actually cut Putin's income? If yes, how much would it cut in absolute numbers? The third question is, what happens to global oil markets now? And how will the price cap affect other countries of the world? What will the price cap do to markets like India and China? Let's now explore some of these answers. First, about the oil price cap. The cap prevents firms in participating countries from providing shipping, insurance and other services to shipments of Russian crude oil that are sold above the set price. In practice, it would mean that the onus will be on these providers to ask their clients for proof that they have bought crude at a cap-compliant price. But in practice, it is possible for the shipping industry to misrepresent or obscure the origin of its cargo. The cap doesn't fully address blends that include Russian crudes. This leaves opportunities to maneuver Russian barrels through refined or partially refined products. Finally, it will be difficult for countries enforcing the cap to truly track the price paid, given the market's opacity. Finally, the crucial test of these policies' viability will lie in enforcement of the cap when breaches inevitably happen. The Kremlin hasn't reacted yet on the decision, although the Russian embassy in the United States say the price cap for Russian oil means in practice that the basic principles of the free market are being reshaped. It also showed confidence in the demand of Russian crude oil. Earlier, Russia has opposed the measure and even threatened to stop production in response. But on Thursday, Russian Foreign Minister Sergei Lavrov hinted a softened stance. He said that any cap will be irrelevant, adding that Russia will negotiate with its partners directly. But the outlook is nonetheless bleak for Russian economy. Perhaps bleak enough to argue that Russia needs its oil revenue and will therefore continue to sell, even if the cap becomes more a constraint than it will be to start with. It is also interesting to note that the price cap at $60 per barrel, reports say this is still above the $50 per barrel rate at which Russia's flagship Urals grade already trades at. Moreover, Chinese and Indian buyers would now simply use the cap in their negotiations with Russia, since countries like India and China are not signatories to the price cap agreement. The only way it could affect these markets will be through shipping and insurance services. That is, if other countries choose to buy Russian crude, they will not be able to opt insurance, shipping and other services from firms of the signatory nations. Also, experts say at $60 per barrel, when the stakes are low, it would not be worth circumventing Western firms' hold on the shipping and also insurance markets. Peter Klepp is the editor-in-chief of the Brussels Report and is now joining us live from Brussels to talk more about this latest development. Hi, Peter. Welcome to WION. Some would say this is hypocrisy by the West in sanctioning Russian oil. How do you see this action by the EU, G7 and Australia?
I think there's a lot of uncertainty on what the practical consequences will be. So let's not forget that there were already sanctions in place on Russian oil exports, but Moscow has managed to cope with that by basically increasing the supply of oil. At the moment, the big bottleneck for Russia that people predict seems to be the number of tankers to transport the oil. So again, there are reports that Russian entities would have purchased a lot of old tankers in order to then, transport all the crude and refined oil from February. That would no longer be permitted in theory, but they would try to circumvent the new sanctions in this way. I think that's sort of where the real questions are. To what extent will this Russian strategy work? Of course, also oil demand will play a big role, and then we have to look at China and the zero COVID policies. Will China continue with its extreme zero COVID policies or not? There are reports that China is finally ending this problematic policy. So I think, yeah, a lot of it depends on all of that.
Peter, I'm so sure very many are curious. How is Russia likely to react to this price cap or oil embargo?
Well, as I mentioned, tankers, buying tankers to try to get the oil, perhaps illegally in violation of the sanctions to buyers. That's one way. But then analysts think that not always all the tankers will be able to dock at Russian ports. They may be too big in some instances. I guess we really have to see. I mean, the whole point of the West is not so much to deprive Russia from selling oil, but to make sure that the income, decreases. So there could be a scenario where, and I think that's quite likely, that these sanctions have an effect of some sort, that Russia manages to sell less of its oil, but due to the sanctions perhaps, and due to other factors like China or other economic factors that are currently unknown, there is a great shortage, and perhaps, for example, the weather, if there's a very cold winter, we'll need more oil. So these other factors may then compensate and drive up the price so much that Russia ends up at least compensating a lot of the income it may lose. So I think it's very tricky to make predictions, and there are all kinds of predictions out there, but I think we will need to see in practice.
Now, according to the EU and G7, the price cap aims to reduce Russia's ability to finance its war in Ukraine from selling crude oil internationally. Will this move really quell the tension, or will it anger the aggressor, which is Russia, even more?
I mean, that's, of course, the first point. If you look at the history of sanctions, they have not been very successful. I mean, that's an objective fact. If you look at even South Africa, Iraq under Saddam Hussein, Iran, Cuba, Venezuela, you name it, North Korea, of course. These sanctions have not been an effective policy tool to, force countries to behave in a certain way. And the hope here is now, let's cut Russia dry financially, and it will be forced to stop the war. I mean, that is a stretch. It's of course possible it works this time around, but in the past we have not seen great results. I think many analysts think that the sanctions would need to be much harsher in order to have an effect on Russia. So even if you could say Russia has 30% less income from oil sales, does this mean that Putin will stop the war? I don't think so, frankly. I mean, the main reason why Putin wants to continue is that he's in a corner. If he stops the war now, questions will be asked in Moscow, whereas today he could still say, maybe let's not ask questions because we are in a conflict. And of course, he's deliberately making sure that the conflict continues as long as possible. So the fact that, Russia would be in a slightly less optimal financial situation is, I think, only a minor factor for Putin to decide whether to continue the war or not.
All right, we'll have to end this discussion here. I've been talking to Peter Klepp, live from Brussels. Thank you.
A pleasure. Thank you.
WION is now available in your country. Download the app now and get all the news on the move.